Hi, this is an introduction to logic. My name is Mark Thorsby, and in this video, we address some of the core concepts that philosophers deal with in terms of logic. Welcome, everyone. I hope you guys are doing well. Today, we're hitting our last section here on language, meaning, and definition. We're going to be looking at what definitions are and what their purpose is, and we're going to be distinguishing between different types of definition. So welcome back, everyone. I hope you guys are doing well. Today we're looking at definitions and their purpose. So let me start off here with talking a little bit about definitions. And if you've been watching our previous videos, previously we talked about the idea of what a definition is, and we noted that the word definition has a specific etymology. That is, it comes from it's a combination of the Latin de, which means concerning or reason by or reason regarding, de, and then finis is the other Latin term, and finis here means something like the limit. And so, at least in the beginning, etymologically, we could say that a definition, let's just say this, a definition is equal to the reason, actually let's see the specific thing. We said a definition refers to by reason of the limit, we could say. That's essentially what a definition is. By reason of the limit. So every concept has a certain conceptual boundary. And to give a definition is to ultimately address what is essentially the boundary for that concept in terms of how does this and how far does this concept apply within a linguistic practice. So definition is really the way in which we sort of circle the wagons around a specific sort of concept so as to identify what it does and, more importantly, what it does not mean. So it's sort of interesting. You might even say that in theology there's a famous discussion by Thomas Aquinas called regarding negative theology. And Thomas Aquinas argued that we could never know what God was in terms of in a positive sense, right? Because if God's infinite, there's no way to conceptualize something that's infinite because I have a finite mind. And so negative theology was the idea that you can gain knowledge about God, not in terms of who or what God is, but in terms of what God is not. So sort of, if you will, you can negatively define, or at least articulate what that boundary concept is. Sort of interesting way of thinking about it. And so you might say that definitions are essentially negative in that same sense. At least that's how I see them myself. Okay, now what's the purpose of a definition? The purpose of a definition ultimately is to explain what the word means and to ultimately explain how to use the word, right? But what we have to say here is that every definition has a specific structural component. So what we're going to talk about here is a little bit about what the structural form of a definition looks like. Right? What's the structural form? Well, every definition has at least two components. On the one hand, the definition has what we call the definidium. And let me write that out for you. Sorry, the definiendum. And the definiendum here, what this is supposed to be one word, I just couldn't write it very well. What the definidium is it's what gets defined. Right? So if I say a bachelor is an unmarried male, the definidium is the word bachelor. That's what I'm defining. Now the other words, when I say a bachelor is an unmarried male, the unmarried male business is what we call the definiens. So let me write that out. D-E-F-I-N-I-E-N-S. Definiens. And this is what does the defining. These are the words that do the defining. I'll just put does the defining. Right? So every time we give a definition, we do that. So you might say that the definidium signals what the concept is. Right? This just signals what the concept is. And in keeping with our earlier discussion, the definidians is what draws the boundary. Right? Or the limit for the conceptual term. Okay? So every definition has these two things, right? That's the first and foremost. Pretty simple. It's just a sort of maybe bizarre language for in terms of describing it. But I wanted to now is talk about the types of definition. And I think in this, I realize my handwriting is poor, so it's probably easier to type and for you to read for you to see what I'm reading or writing, that is. Okay, so what are the types of definition? And there's actually a number of types of definition. So the first type of definition is what we call a stipulative definition. And a stipulative definition is essentially the first definition given, right? This is the definition that assigns meaning to a word for the first time, right? So if I make up a new word, I have to stipulate what I mean, so I have to give a stipulative definition. So this is the first definition, the very first time a word is given. So you can imagine when a philosopher makes up a word. Let's take, for example, Martin Heidegger. He uses a word called Dasein. And what is Dasein? The definition he gives is Dasein is the being for whom being is an issue, right? So there he gives a stipulative definition. And remember, his stipulative definition includes both the definidium as well as the definiens, right? So it includes both of those, right? So that's a stipulative definition. Now, one of the things that's interesting about a stipulative definition is that it is non-bivalent. It's non-bivalent. Now, what do I mean by bivalent? What the heck does that mean? Well, bivalence refers to the idea that every proposition is either true or false, right? So if I say, for instance, it's raining outside, that statement is either true or false. And that's all we mean by bivalent. Now, a stipulative definition is non-bivalent. That is, a stipulative definition cannot be true or false. Why? Because it's the very first one. Remember, a stipulative definition becomes the, if you will, the ground floor, the basis upon which all the other definitions that word may connotate later on, right? It includes all of those, but they're all based on the stipulative definition from the get-go. So the stipulative definition is neither true nor false. That's just the ground rules. That's the entryway in terms of understanding the concept. So it's non-bivalent. So it's interesting. So if you make up a word and you define it, someone can't tell you that you're wrong or that that's a false definition. It's not a true definition either, though, right? It just is the first definition, right? So we have the stipulative versus so we have a stipulative definition. Let me go down here. So what's the next type of definition? The next kind is the one most of us are most familiar with, and that's the lexiconal definition. And the lexiconal definition reports the meaning of a word in language. That is, in terms of its actual practice. Let me scroll this up so you can see. So a lexiconal definition tells us how the word actually gets used, right, in the language. And so that's the kind of definition where you open up Webster's dictionary, and what you get are lexiconal definitions, right, where you'll get 4 or 5 different definitions for one word. That's because what those definitions are doing is they're describing 4 or 5 different practices in which that word has its meaning, and within those practices, here's what the definiens is, or whatever, right? So we have lexiconal definition. Now, this is where things get sort of interesting, because this is where the sort of Wittgenstein discussion sort of comes back into play, right? Because a lexiconal definition reveals practices, whereas the stipulative definition does not. Now, by contrast, the lexiconal definition is bivalent, right? It is either true or false that the word gets used in such and such a case, right? That's either the case or it's not. And if it's in the dictionary, it is the case for the most part, at least if it's a good dictionary, right? Interestingly enough, Ludwig Wittgenstein, one of the few books he actually published in his lifetime was a dictionary. So he would have enjoyed this discussion, I'm sure. The next sort of definition here is what your author calls a precising definition. We'll talk about making your own words, right? What is a precising definition? Well, a precising definition is a definition that reduces the vagueness of a term, right? Now, what is vagueness? A word is said to be vague if it's unclear how to apply the word, right? So, for instance, if someone uses a term and you're not sure about what it denotates, it probably means you have a problem of vagueness. So, ultimately, any definition has some degree of vagueness. It depends on how specific your definitions are supposed to be, right? And so precising is where you slowly try to specify with increased specificity, so as to boil out, if you will, any possible vagueness in terms of understanding the word. Now, vagueness, um, well, that's pretty much it here. Let's move here to the next sort of definition, which is called a theoretical definition. A theoretical definition assigns the meaning. There you go. It assigns meaning by characterizing the term into a theory. And I don't mean turn it into a theory, but I mean characterize it via some sort of theory. So maybe that would be easier. Characterizing the term via a theory of some sort. So let me give you a sort of example. Take, for instance, the example of heat. Right? Imagine if someone asked me, what's heat? And I said, well, we can define heat as the accelerated motion, accelerated molecular motion, right? Accelerated molecular motion. We can define heat that way. That is, you can see what I'm doing there is I'm giving you basically a chemistry perspective or chemistry definition, chemical definition for what heat is, which is namely, it's when the molecules begin to move and flutter around faster and faster. The faster they go, the more heat that we have. So that's an example of a theoretical definition because I've essentially defined it through a theoretical lens of some sort, right? Another example here would be, for instance, what about Newton's second law, right? Newton's second law is the idea that force is equal to momentum times acceleration, right? So that's a theoretical definition. It literally just comes in the form of a formula, right? So it's that theoretical, right? So we have theoretical definitions. The last type of definition we have are what we call persuasive definitions, and these are the least likely to really be real. Now, what is a persuasive definition? Let's put it this: it is a value-laden definition. This isn't exactly how your author defines it, but I think this is maybe an easier way of understanding it. Oops. A value-laden definition, and that is, those are definitions that include packaged within them, right, specific value claims. Now, in an earlier video, I think it was 2.1, we talked about what value claims are and how they relate to language, right? But let me give you an example. If someone says abortion is the murdering of an unborn fetus, well, that's a persuasive definition because by referring to abortion as murder, I'm actually including within my definition a certain type of value that if you accept the definition, you'll have to also accept that value claim too. So persuasive definitions are these are the sorts of definitions that people actually make in conversations. They say, they'll define, for instance, that they'll define something in a favorable or unfavorable light within the context of their discussion or their argument. Now, that's the use of a persuasive definition. Typically, persuasive definitions are very bad, at least in logic, right? Bad in the sense that ultimately our goal is to evaluate these ideas, these concepts and arguments that we're studying in an objective manner as much as possible. And that means excluding value claims that get sort of bundled in. And since you might say is that what the persuasion is something like the combination of other definition types. Because if I give a persuasive definition, that's on the one hand stipulative, because I'm the one assigning the term, but it could be lexiconal, it could be precising, and so on and so forth. Okay? Let's correct that spelling. Okay. So those are the types of definition that are possible. It's fairly straightforward. So what you're going to have to do now is let's go take a look at what the homework exercises look like for this section. Okay, so here's 2.3 definitions and their purpose. This is the book. You can see here's the a definition includes the definidium as well as the definiens. What's going on? Okay, let's change it. So there's the stipulative definition. You've got the lexiconal definition. Here's some examples like a bank, the slope bordering a stream or river, the inclination of an aircraft during a turn, an institution for receiving, lending, and safeguarding money, right? This is the basic sort of definitions we're accustomed to. The precising definition, words such as fresh, rich, and poor are vague. So the precising definitions try to overcome that problem of poverty. There's a thing about Peter Abelard. Theoretical definitions. Let's see here. Persuasive definitions. Here's some good examples. Liberal means a drippy-eyed do-gooder obsessed with giving away other people's money. Now you can see that definition is, well, it includes it has a certain value assumption in it, a certain political value assumption that's sort of embedded within the definition. So this isn't a very good definition, you could say. At least not a good definition for doing logical analysis. Okay, let's see if we can scroll down here. So here's what the exercise sets look like. Okay, so the first thing you're going to need to do is determine whether the following definitions are stipulative, lexical, precise, and theoretical, or persuasive. So here you basically just want to put the types of definitions to the side and run through them and see if you can isolate and articulate which ones are which. So blind means, for federal income tax purposes, either the inability to see better than 20 over 200 in the better eye with glasses or having a field of vision of 20 degrees or less. Now, this would be good to pause the video here and ask yourself, what kind of definition is that? Okay, now I don't know if you paused or not, but what's the definition? It's a precising definition. Because here we're giving a very precise, exact definitions for this definidium, right? So let's take the next one. Football means a sport in which modern-day gladiators brutalize one another while trying to move a ridiculously shaped ball from one end of the playing field to the other. Now, what kind of definition is that? Pause the video and think about it. Now, if you've come out, hopefully, you caught that this was which one? This is a persuasive definition, right? They're trying to persuade you about not liking football, I guess. Let's skip to 4 here. Diffident means lacking confidence in oneself, characterized by modest reserve. Now, what kind of definition is this? This is probably, just by looking at it, is it a theoretical definition? No, it's not theoretical. Is it a precising definition? No, not really. Is it a lexiconal definition? It looks like a lexiconal definition. Could it be a stipulative definition? Maybe. Now, I don't think it is. I think it's a lexiconal definition, but it's potentially possible that that could have been a stipulative definition. The thing is, there's no way for us to know because it'd have to be the first time we'd heard the word. So most words, interestingly enough, we probably don't know what the original stipulative definition was, though etymologists may be able to trace some of that, right? So here's how you basically do that. Pretty fun homework, actually, and not too difficult, I don't think. So what do you do in section 2? Here you're going to get a following of exercises that involve constructing definitions. So invent stipulative definitions for 2 new words that you wish to introduce into the language for the first time. This is your big chance to make your own words up. So do it, and we're going to let you do it this time, right? So you got to create definitions and play around with them. And then there's some true false. Pretty straightforward as long as you've read the chapter. Okay? So, but anyway, as we conclude, hopefully you've seen that there's a number of different types of definitions possible. And as we continue to explore arguments, especially real-world arguments that are around us, it becomes increasingly necessary to pinpoint exactly what type of definition is given when one is given, especially when we talk about those persuasive definitions, because those persuasive definitions, those are ultimately very problematic in terms of logic. because they're too emotive ultimately, because they're trying they're sneaking in these emotive or value claims. And the whole point of logic, or at least of evaluating an argument in terms of its logic, is to assess whether or not those claims make sense, not to agree to the assumption ahead of time. So we want to avoid the precising definitions, but typically you'll see most of what the types of definitions we run into are probably either theoretical or lexiconal. That's typically. Okay, so those are the types of definition. I hope you've enjoyed the video. I hope it's helpful. And I look forward to seeing you guys online. Talk to you guys later. Bye.